for joining us. So we're just starting the recording. Welcome to folks who have joined us. The webinar will be about 50 minutes in length, and then we'll have some time for questions. At the end, we'll explain to you how to get follow-up information, how to get a copy of the webinar, and how to get a copy of Sydney's presentation. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Sydney. Sydney Massey is actually from here in BC, and she's a director of the nutrition education for the BC Dairy Foundation. And she's been working with that foundation for the last 25 years. So she's been well involved and has a wealth of information to share today. She recently completed the PEN pathway on eating together for the Dietitians of Canada. And PEN is Practice-Based Evidence in Nutrition, and it's a set of knowledge pathways developed from key practice questions and evidence-based answers. And every presentation that we're trying to do for the School Health Knowledge Network, we're really focusing on evidence-based information. So she's really speaking to us today from that. It's very important. She's received a lot of honors from her colleagues, including the Jackie McConkey Bridges Nutrition Communications Award in 1990 and again in 2007. The Ross Laboratories Clinical Excellence Award in 1990, and from the BC Dairy Foundation, the Speaking of Food and Healthy Living Award, both in 2002 and 2006. So she's been recognized by her colleagues. Sydney graduated with honors from Barnard College in her native Sydney, New York, with a degree, first of all, in linguistics, and then she went on to earn a master's in public health in nutrition from the University of North Carolina. So Sydney, I'm going to click off the audio, welcome you to our group, and I'll continue to watch folks and get them signed on as they arrive. So welcome, Sydney, and thank you.
Thank you, Dawn, for a lovely introduction, and hello to everyone out there, including a few people I do know. I'd like, first of all, to acknowledge the graphic that I have on this front slide. Eat Together, Eat Better was a logo developed in Washington State, and I really like to credit them for getting the movement started on awareness and action around getting people to eat together. And it all happened in Washington State when several agencies who were all involved with low-income families said, well, how can we work together to promote good nutrition? And they pulled together some focus groups with mothers, and it's through those focus groups and really from the mothers that the phrase came out, when you eat together, you eat better. Well, it turns out that this is a very deeply held value, not only in the United States, but also in Canada. And this is going back some time. Actually, you could go even much further back than this and see that there's a consistent and strong and deeply held value that eating dinner together is a very important thing. And here's from a public opinion poll in 1991, 80% ranking eating dinner together with children as one of the most important activities they do with children, or as very important. In Canada, we have the Quebec Family Meal Study that gives us a little insight into how people think about eating together. And in this study, they were looking at Haitian, Portuguese, and Vietnamese families. And the insight gained from this study is that by stressing health, we're linking with the mother's understanding of the importance of family meals. And there's really a lot more to be learned about the differences between different cultures. We don't know a whole lot about that yet with regard to eating together, but I can say that it is still an important value across cultures. Very recently, in a StatsCan report that came out in 2007, it was found that Canadians say mealtime is the favorite time of day for family members to interact and talk about their day. Now, this I found to be a very interesting piece of evidence. It's the OECD, the economically developed countries in the world, so it's about 25 countries. And this was a study that looked at 15-year-olds in all these different countries who say they eat family meals several times a week. And it turns out that internationally among the developed countries, close to 80% say they eat family meals several times a week. And it's a little hard to do this by webinar, but think for a moment, which country do you think would be the number one, the country where people say they eat together most often? Here's the answer, Italy. And I think probably people aren't too surprised by that. We know that in certain of the European countries, the eating is highly valued. And here's the top 3 countries. Iceland was a little surprise to me, and France, I think, is also no surprise to most people. And where do you think Canada fits? Well, we're the 18th out of the 25 countries, and the U.S. is 23rd out of the 25. And it's interesting to note where the U.S. fits on this whole scheme, because a lot of the evidence does come from the U.S. And we can see that we're not terribly different, although a little bit better off than the U.S. with regard to eating meals frequently together. So, are family meals disappearing? Well, really not by a long shot. I would still say it's the majority that eat together frequently, but what is concerning is the number who seldom or never eat together as a family. And depending on the literature you look at, it's somewhere between 1/4 to 1/3 never or seldom eat together as a family. And we do know, and this is shown in many, many studies, that family meals tend to decrease as children get older. And there's some very obvious reasons why this happens, because children are getting more involved in activities outside the home. Several studies have examined the difference between what teens say and what parents say about eating together. So on the teen side, we see that 24% say they eat dinner with their family never to 3 times a month, so in other words, seldom. Whereas parents, only 11% say they eat seldom together. So there's some kind of difference in the perception about family meals there. And if we look on the positive side, teens say, 50% say they eat frequently, whereas parents think it happens a little bit more often. So that raises some interesting questions to which we don't really have answers at this time about what is the cause of this difference. It could be that the families include younger children, and so the parents are saying, well, we do eat together, and it means everybody except the teenager. Or perhaps it could be something like the teenager saying, well, you know, I don't really feel like we're eating together because, you know, my mother's off talking on the phone. So we don't really know what's going on here, but it is interesting to note the difference at this point. Now, this is a little outside our topic, but I felt it's really worth noting to give us sort of the larger context, that it's not just about children and eating together, but we have some really strong evidence about older adults. And here we're looking not necessarily at families eating together, but family-style meals. And it turns out that family-style meals, in other words, with people gathering together, even if they're not all in the family, it could be at a residential or independent living facility, family-style meals benefit older adults. And congregate meals, so in other words, like even if it's not where you live, a residential setting, but older adults getting together in the community for a congregate meal, that there are benefits there as well. So let's examine the benefits. First of all, there's a very obvious benefit in terms of nutrition, and we can examine those details. I would say the current interest in research dates back to about 2000, and Gilman was one of the first. He's a physician, and he valued family meals, and he was noticing, he and his wife were having a conversation saying, gee, you know, we just don't seem to be sitting down with our kids as often. They were getting into the teen years. And he had access to a data set that included 9 to 14-year-olds, and he examined what was going on there and found that 9 to 14-year-olds who ate dinner with their family had more fruits and vegetables, less pop, more of certain specific nutrients like fiber, calcium, folate, iron, vitamins, B6, B12, vitamin C and E, less saturated fat, less trans fat, and a lower glycemic load. So all positive benefits of eating together with the family. And since then, one of the biggest data sets examining eating together comes from the Minnesota area with Diane Newmark-Stainer and her colleagues. And they're looking at middle and high school students. And again, they found very similar results to Gilman: more fruits and vegetables, grains, more calcium-rich foods, and fewer soft drinks. Well, the benefits go further than that, and we're beginning to see that there's decreased risk for overweight and obesity. And this comes from several studies, but I think it's interesting to note our Canadian data on this with Paul Zeigler's and the work he did in Nova Scotia with grade 5 students. They did measure heights and weights in this study and found that there was a decreased risk for overweight and obesity among children who eat more frequently at home. And at this point, I'd just like to point out that there's not really one definition of eating together used in all these studies. Sometimes the question, like in the Newmark-Stainer data, the question is asked a little bit more broadly. They don't specify a particular meal time, but in this case of the Nova Scotia study, they did specify eating supper together. We're also beginning to see that there's a protective effect against eating disorders among those who eat dinners or meals together more frequently. This data that I'm quoting comes out of that Project EAT data from the Midwest, and they found an inverse relationship between the frequency of family meals, more structured environment at meals, positive atmosphere in meals, and disordered eating behaviors. It was especially strong for girls, and making family meals a priority was the single most protective factor. One of the interesting things that you can note about meal times is that parents can serve as a role model when people are eating together. And there's several studies that are interesting in this regard. From the work done by Fisher, mothers who drink milk more frequently have daughters who drink more frequently and who also drink fewer soft drinks. And it is thought that it's the role modeling that's helping out here. This same group did go on and look at the same effect with fruits and vegetables, and found similarly that that by eating, the mothers who ate more fruits and vegetables had daughters who ate more fruits and vegetables as well. Another aspect of role modeling might have to do with the conversation around the table. And quite early on, Artie Gillespie and Cheryl Acterberg found that nutrition is often a topic of conversation at the dinner table, and that children cite parents as a source of nutrition information. More recently, a group looked at low-income adolescent girls, and it cited that they get more calcium when they see important others drinking milk. So this is the beginning of the indication, and I'm kind of interested in this myself, is looking at eating together in a broader way. Most of the literature is focusing on the family meal, but I'm quite interested to see what the benefits might be for other groups of people eating together. And this may play into thinking ahead to the role of the school in an Eat Together initiative. And just quickly harking back to the older adults, there's some very strong evidence about better nutrition. Better intakes of 16 out of 18 nutrients studied among the people in congregate meal programs. This is the U.S. program. So when they eat together in a community setting, they have much better nutrient intake. And these are particularly nutrients of concern with the older adults. Similarly, when they're in residential care settings, there's improved energy intakes, and this is very important because in the older adult, you're starting to worry about getting enough food, period. And malnutrition is a frequent problem in this age group in residential care settings. So you get much improved intake when people are eating together. The family style meal that is looked at in these residential and community care settings sometimes have, like the details are spelled out sometimes with tablecloths, but the idea is that the people are sitting around the table. It's not a pre-served tray. You kind of help yourself. There's no competing activities. There's a beginning and end to the meal time. They're not trying to do other activities like give out medications and clean the facility, so it's like a special time, the family style meal. So moving from the nutrition benefits, there's some very strong communication benefits as well. And John Roseman is a psychologist who's talked about this quite a bit. And he talks about the idea that when there's a regularly scheduled family meal, there seems to be a better emotional fit when people eat together. And I don't believe I have a slide on it, but I think it's interesting to note that while this is true, there seems to be some evidence that even if the family is not totally emotionally fit, when there's some signs of dysfunctionality, there still seems to be a benefit of the family meal. And I think this is important for practitioners to note, because some people have been concerned about promoting family meals if the family is dysfunctional, like is that going to cause more harm? And it seems from the beginning evidence that we have that no, it won't. I was at a conference about a year ago when Enrique Jacobi spoke, and I was very struck by his comment that we seem in current society to be relinquishing the social dimension of eating. And really this is what eating together is all about. And he showed this famous painting by Edward Hopper, Nighthawks, which seems to show the very lonely way of eating that maybe a lot of us are adopting. With the older adults, we see that there's way more social contacts per month when older adults are eating together. And participants in the congregate meals identify conversation, camaraderie, support, and friendship as outstanding benefits of the program. It's very fascinating, though, to look at the benefits, the social benefits for teens. And there's some very, very strong evidence here, to the point that a lot of agencies who deal with risk reduction really look at eating together as a strategy to prevent the amount of cigarette smoking. Look at this. If the family is eating together 5 times a week or more, so very frequently, the amount of cigarette smoking is way lower compared to those who eat meals together less frequently. And similarly, we can find evidence that there's lower use of marijuana, getting into far fewer serious fights, decreased levels of sexual activity by age 16, and decreased number of suicide attempts among teens who eat together more frequently. Here's one of the agencies. It's in the U.S., but they've done some very strong campaigns. It's CASA, the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University. And they ran a campaign one year using this poster, one habit, the family meal, that prevents another. Because they are seeing that the family meal seems to be the most strongly related factor to differentiating among the teens that get involved with substance abuse versus those who don't. We can also see a benefit in terms of school performance. So several studies have looked at this, and we see that 63% of teens who eat family meals frequently get all A's, or mostly A's and B's, versus those who have less frequent family meals. people also recognize the benefit of family meals in terms of passing on family traditions. We held an interesting meeting in BC in the spring of 2007, bringing together provincial representatives from various health sectors and various cultural groups. And among the people who represented First Nations and some of the immigrant groups, they very strongly identified with this benefit and saw the family meal as a very important way to pass on the culture. It's interesting to note that this is brought out in the guidance, the food guides of Thailand and Japan, for example, where they're encouraging family meals. Thailand's guidance, a happy family is when family members eat together, enjoy treasured family tastes, and good home cooking. So what is a family meal? I'm very curious to know exactly what the definition is and how far we can go, and we are beginning to do some market research here in BC to learn about this. In the Washington State campaign, they said, well, a family meal is when at least one adult and one child eat together, because families aren't all that traditional two adult, two child kind of picture. But they also went on and said, well, maybe we should be promoting eating together in a broader way, and maybe it's just when two or more people eat together. That is a family meal. In the New York Times, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an article looking at family meals, and these pictures intrigued me. So this is a very busy book publisher, the woman pictured here, and she's showing us one evening what her family was eating, and we see that there's 3 children and the 2 adults in the family, and there were 4 different meals. They're all sitting down at the table, they're all eating at the same time, but they're eating different things. So it's, to me, very interesting to explore this issue about exactly what is a family meal and what do you need to do to be able to get those benefits. And I don't really think we have the answer yet, but I think we have to come to terms with that in order to be able to promote and support eating together. So these are some of the questions in my mind. Does everyone have to be eating the same thing? Does the food have to be prepared at home? Does the meal have to be at home? And what about television and the phone? Well, it turns out there have been several campaigns addressing TV during meals, and there is some evidence that eating together isn't as good. You don't get the same benefits in terms of nutrition when TV is on. So TV viewing during meals is associated with fewer fruits and vegetables, more pizzas, more snack foods, more pop, and twice as much caffeine. So these are associations at this point. We're not talking about cause and effect, but there seems to be a pattern here. One of the things Washington State learned about from their campaign to promote eating together is that when you turn the television off, families really needed help. They needed help getting started on conversation. They said, well, what do you talk about? And so these are a few of the ideas developed during that campaign in Washington State to help families get started on talking together. And some of these are kind of fun just to get any group of people talking together, whether it's at a meal or not. A lot of the research has focused on what are the obstacles to eating together. And being too busy, or variations on that, like your schedules, parents' work schedules, kids' sport and activity schedules, parent meetings and exercise schedules. So it's really a lot about time. And I'm really curious to know how you can kind of jump that gap between what you value. People say they value family meals. Everyone identifies being busy, and yet some families, in spite of being busy, manage to do family meals, and others don't. And so that's where I think it would be really interesting to learn what's the difference between those families and how can we support the ones who can't manage to get the family meals as frequently to do it more often. So here's my question: how can we encourage people to eat together and eat better? And I'd like to examine a few efforts that are working on this. So I think it's worthwhile to expand the definition. I think that it doesn't have to be all about dinner. That is the traditional and idealized vision of it, and it's great if that one will work, but I see nothing wrong with looking at other meal times, and breakfast is another one that works for some families. Another part of that idealized picture is that it's got to be this home-prepared, from-scratch kind of hot meal. But in my mind, there's nothing wrong with gathering together for sandwiches instead of something hot in the evening. Maybe it could be just a totally different setting, not like that meal time around the table necessarily, but a midnight snack with teens is one strategy that many parents cite as the time they manage to get together with their older children. And from the evidence we have so far, it does seem that turning off the ringer on phones and turning on answering machines, turning the television off, will also help people have a meaningful meal time together. This is an example of a way a community figured out about eating together that I heard about just recently. It's a small community in Alberta, Vermilion, and the school involved was St. Jerome's Catholic School. They organized a Thursday night fundraiser. They charged people $8 or $35 for the family, and it was a completely school-organized event. Each grade was responsible for one item that was at the supper, and this was a turkey coleslaw, lazy cabbage rolls, potato supper, which was apparently very typical of this community, or it was like a really nice dinner by this community standards. The younger students made the table decorations. The older students did the cooking and serving. They used the facilities at a local community center because the school itself did not have the proper facilities. They managed to raise about $5,000 and served about 750 suppers. They really brought the community together with this event. And they even managed to deliver some of the meals to homebound elderly. So I think this is a really interesting example of how a school can get involved in an Eat Together initiative. Another school example is the Lovely Lunch Day. And I think it's a beautiful example of how school can serve as a role model for eating together. This is a grade 1 class in the Coquitlam School in British Columbia. The teacher read Bread and Jam for Frances, in which Frances, who's a picky eater, decides she only wants to eat bread and jam. And so her mother says, okay, Frances, you can have bread and jam, and Frances only has bread and jam for breakfast, bread and jam for lunch, bread and jam for supper, and she's quite happy until one day she says, what I am is tired of jam. And so her mother says, shall I send you a lovely lunch? And the next day she does have a very interesting, lovely lunch. And you can see she's taking out her doily in school, and she's starting to take out the items for her lovely lunch. So the class reads the story. Mrs. Bernanke, the teacher, asks her class if they would like to have a lovely lunch at school too. And they do. And here's the school, the students having their lovely lunch. They make their own little placemats, and they bring their lunches from home, and they sit and they have a very wonderful lunchtime. And I have to say, I don't know how schools are across the country, but here in BC, it's rare to have a school that has a lunchroom, have at all a proper place for students to eat. They are most frequently eating in the hallways, on the floor of the gymnasium, in a very noisy environment, and it's really not at all an environment that is inviting or valuing the mealtime. So this example is quite different from the norm in BC, and I think students are really learning something. I really feel like lunch is a missed learning opportunity in schools, and I would like to see ways of overcoming this challenge that we're facing. At the end of the lovely lunch, the students are asking, can we have another lovely lunch day? And I think that speaks to how students, children will enjoy the proper kind of setup for a meal. Another example that we have in Vancouver, and has actually spread beyond Vancouver since it started, is the Cooking Fun for Families program, which was a collaboration between school, community, and parents. And I see this as a program that can help families to eat together and eat better. It grew out of a research project between Vancouver Coastal Health Authority and the Institute of Health Promotion Research at the University of British Columbia. And the way it works is that it's a weekly afternoon program for the school children and the parents. The program runs from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The parents gather together at 2 o'clock. And what they do is they start off by preparing a snack. And this is one of the groups that we have in a neighborhood in Vancouver that I spent an afternoon with. So in this example, they're preparing a little afternoon snack. They walk over to the school and pick up their children at 3 o'clock and bring them back, and they can sit down and have the snack. Meantime, the parents are starting to work on the dinner, and depending on the meal they're preparing, they may involve the children, or sometimes the children go off and do their own homework or play a little bit while the parents get on with the preparation. During the program, parents learn about nutrition and food safety, and we can see in these photos that one parent is actually taking down the ingredients on one of the ingredients used at this particular cooking session. The other parent is putting all the dishes that were supposedly clean and on the shelf into the dishwasher again, because they've learned that at a community center you can't really rely on the cleanliness of whoever came before you, and they really took food safety very seriously here. They wanted to start with dishes they knew were sanitized and clean. Here we see some of the children playing and doing their activities just before the meal is served. Here's what they were preparing, and it was kind of interesting for me to note in this particular group, though they were all Asian, and you might assume they all spoke the same language. Indeed, they did not. So they learned a variety of cooking. Tonight, they were cooking something that was very familiar to them. Because time was short, they had just gone on a supermarket tour, so they were packing a lot in on this day. So they were cooking a stir fry, preparing a congee, and they also did a tapioca dessert. There were about 25 people in this particular group between the parents and the children, and they're serving up the food, and they call the children to the table, and then they all sit down and eat together. And what was remarkable to me with this large size group is that there was this lovely murmur and conversation around the table. It was just a very, very peaceful kind of a meal time, even with that number of people. So between 4:30 and 5 they eat. The children are socializing, practicing their manners, learning how to carry on conversation in a safe and warm environment. And I believe I have some of the notes here from the evaluation. I did mention that they really didn't speak the same language. And for the mothers, it was one of the first times that they actually socialized. I was surprised to learn that they were not brand new immigrants, that English was difficult for them, but they had been extremely isolated in their community, even though they had lived in Vancouver for around 10 years, I would say, for most of them. It was the first time they were meeting some of their neighbors, and they had a reason to start to speak English because that was the common language between them. In this particular program, private sponsors paid for some food costs and a coordinated salary, and many of the food items came from the food bank. participants do evaluate the program, and here's some of the typical kind of comments that came out of the program. The students love to play and love the food. The neighborhood assistant, the person who was running the program, identified that cooking together develops a link between the different cultures. And a parent said good things about the cooking program are that we learn about nutritious foods, how to cook healthy foods for our kids, and the kids enjoy learning how to make snacks. Here they are learning instead of watching TV. So I'm at the end of my presentation here, and I have a few websites identified that I think can help you with further resources. For those of you who are members of Dietitians of Canada and subscribe to PEN, there is quite a lot of detail in this pathway, not just the evidence, but also some resources and tools. And so it's a very good, I think, link to the evidence. The Purdue University website has some tools and resources that you can use to promote family meals. And the final one, the Washington State University, includes all of the original resources, and I still think they're quite excellent to base some of your materials on. Very little, I think, slants it to the U.S. audience, and so I don't think it needs very much to modify to be usable. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions that you have.
Thank you, Sydney. It's Dawn here, and I'm trusting that people can hear me. And it's Dawn Benson, the moderator of the webinar, and I'm impressed how quickly you moved through 64 slides. I always worry about there being too many slides. And I appreciated particularly the three programs you talked about, the Lovely Lunch program, the Community Supper program, and the Cooking Fun for Families program. I'm wondering, certainly, if there's questions from our group, our participants from across Canada, if they could type them in. I'm also wondering if there are any other programs that people are using that they could share with us. So I'd like you to use the chat box. It's down below the participant box. There's a box where the last comment was from Lisa saying that she got audio. Below that, there's a box that you type in. You have to put your cursor on it, your mouse on it. You can type in a message, type. Then when you hit return, it comes into the box so that we can all see that. So first of all, asking if there's any questions for Sydney, and also are there some other programs out there that you're aware of? So if we could hear from folks, that would be great. I see Pamela is typing away for us. Thank you. And Cindy, I know you're here too, and you may want to make some comments.
Thanks, Dawn. It's Cindy here, Cindy Andrew with Canadian Association for School Health. Certainly, I think there are a lot of good examples of work underway around creating a positive, nurturing school environment in terms of nutrition and healthy eating. One resource that comes to mind that's just really now starting to rubber hit the road, so to speak, that absolutely includes items of relevance for today's webinar, including kind of the appropriate scheduling of nutrition breaks and the role modeling effect within schools, and that is Nutrition Tools for Schools in Ontario. And you'll be able to find out more about that via the information that we'll share with everyone on today's call. And I suspect actually there are probably some folks on the call today who are far more aware and involved in implementing that program than am I, and would encourage them to share if they have some specific examples. There are other jurisdictions that certainly are doing school-wide campaigns around healthy eating that include the parental, and we know that we need to extend our efforts. It's not just schools, and teachers are the first to say, listen, we can only do so much. And so, but certainly there are some opportunities where through school-based efforts, parents and families can receive some information and education around the value of eating together. And I think this is, as much as the people on today's call I would think are the real champions in this area and quote-unquote get it, lots to be done in terms of helping increase folks' awareness. I do see that there are some questions there, Dawn, so maybe I'll flip it back to you for some moderating.
Thank you, Cindy. And we'll just go down. Pamela, first of all, made the comment we offer an after-school cooking club program in our schools. And the last session, the grade 6 kids invite their parents to have a family supper where the kids have prepared the meals. So that sounds very helpful. Val mentioned, this is Yvonne and Val from Edmonton, I would like to know what are some of your strategies in BC for getting funding for some of these programs. I'll just add a comment, and then Sydney, I'll ask you to respond to that as well. One of the projects that is bringing some funding into our little district, I'm here in Salmon Arm in the South Interior of BC, is the LINKS program from the Ministry of Education. And it is about learning, involves knowledge and nutrition, and many schools are using that for a breakfast meal. Other schools also have other meals where they are trying to get families involved as well. The other area that I see bringing in some funding support locally is the Parent Advisory Councils, called PACs, where schools are approaching them and saying, we'd like to, we know there's an important link here to nutrition and families and dinners, and so can we plan some school dinners that way? So that there's been support for that, as well as some of the clubs, the French Club or the French Immersion Group. They are having meals as a French cafe or a meal tied to curriculum, an international meal, and again, but they're making sure that, as Sydney showed, the kids have placemats, they're sitting down together, and so it's a tie-in with the curriculum and food. So those are my ideas, and Sydney, over to you.
Hi there. Pam, I wanted to thank you for your comment about the family supper. That's actually something that's done fairly frequently in a lot of settings. They have Friday night suppers. A lot of districts run something like that, and I think it is a wonderful way for a PAC, or that's how we call it here, our Parent Advisory Councils, to start thinking about fundraising, or even just as a social event, not necessarily fundraising, but so many of our parent councils are oriented around fundraising that something like this could play a dual role. Val and Yvonne, I'm sorry I can't completely answer your question well. The program that started in Vancouver about the Cooking Fund for Families, I believe the funding started one way with because of a research project, but it morphed into funding from a variety of sources, and it is currently run under something called the Fresh Choice Kitchens, which is where a lot of our community kitchens first started. And they have a website, and I think they have quite a variety of funders, and that's I think the Cooking Fund for Families programs are run through that now. Although I'm really not the best authority on that. I just see there's another comment. Any social marketing campaigns promoting family meals? Sheila, I don't know where you're writing from, but there's been a lot of talk here in BC and in Alberta about wanting to do something more. And I believe Alberta is talking about perhaps getting going on a social marketing campaign. Of course, that would take a while before you saw anything develop from that. In BC, we can't exactly do a social marketing campaign because we have another social marketing campaign going on called Act Now. However, the Fraser Health Authority, one of our 5 health authorities, is about to embark on a social marketing campaign to eat together within that health authority. And BC Dairy Foundation has received a grant from the Ministry of Health to do some work around this, that while it won't be labeled or seen by the provincial government as a social marketing campaign, we'll be able to provide the tools, some kind of common tools that people can use within the province, so that it creates more of a movement. So we can't call it, or we can't designated as a social marketing campaign, but it might function in a similar way because we're going to have a lot of common tools and resources used at the same time in a variety of settings. So maybe that addresses, Sheila, your question. Who's raising a hand? Maybe I'll turn this off so Dawn can answer.
Okay, just wanted to let you see that Sheila wants a contact for the Health Authority. That was a new question. And Pamela mentioned the Peel region in Ontario has done some TV ads and posters. And even if you can't get social marketing out in a big way to the whole province or your whole community, if you could get it out through school newsletters, I mean, that's a way to begin. So any way that you can get information out there. So over to Sheila's question, Sydney.
Hi, yes. The contact in Fraser Health would be Jane Wark, W-A-R-K, and she's a community nutritionist. I don't have her email handy, but you know what? I don't have my contact information on here. Sheila, if you email me, I can provide a link to Jane. My email is smassey, M-A-S-S-E-Y, at BCDF, as in British Columbia Dairy Foundation.ca. I'll also type it into the chat. She did it. Thanks, Dawn.
Great, and we will be providing a follow-up wiki, which will have Sydney's email, which will have a lot of follow-up information as well, a huge variety of resources that Sydney has provided to us, and as well Cindy providing information from the School Health Knowledge Network. So back to you, Cindy. We have Sydney's and Cindy's. Do you want to tell us a bit more about the wiki that will be coming?
Thanks, Dawn, and as always, we're so appreciative of our leaders' time. And Sydney, thank you again for your time today and the work that you put into the presentation. And most importantly, I think for helping lead this movement, as you refer to it. And I think it clearly is that. It's in its early stages, but clearly by the fact that there are the number of people there are on today's call, I think we all appreciate that this is an important area that we need to do our part. And so on that note, the wiki that Dawn refers to, and please, if you're not familiar with it, don't be scared off. It's basically a website that's been created that explicitly for the purposes of sharing information relevant to today's webinar. So much of the information, all of the information that Sydney sent along, we have posted on this shared filing cabinet, if you will, shared virtual filing cabinet. And yours truly and Dawn as well have added some additional items of relevance for you, and so clearly it's a bit of a almost cold notes type of exercise geared to helping support some information around this. And per the sharing that Sydney did, the Fraser Health contact and Peel Health as well, we'll do our part to follow up with those two spots to see what information that they might have available to share at this point, and we'll include that information on the wiki. So there's a nice example of some follow-up that we're happy to offer up on. But again, this wiki is really just meant to build and share, and so if you have information that you would like to see shared with everyone on today's call, by all means, we welcome people to post a little bit of information on that wiki or send it to myself or Dawn, and we'll be happy to post it there. Taking a step outside of the webinar and the wiki, as many of you might be familiar with the fact that a nutrition and schools related community of practice has been initiated. And this is a community that brings together multi-layers of folks from a variety of organizations and networks. And it's really a very practice-focused, informal kind of network. We connect typically 3 to 4 times a year, mostly by teleconference, one annual face-to-face opportunity if we're able to manage that. And this provides an opportunity to to discuss evidence-informed approaches around nutrition and school health that certainly include but go beyond the notion of a supportive, nurturing eating environment, of which we hope schools as much as homes are those. So if you're interested in knowing more about the community of practice, which is chaired, by the way, for Dr. Mary McKenna out of University of New Brunswick, who many of you might know is very active researcher in the area of school nutrition policy. But if you'd like to know more about the community of practice, please do contact me. There's information on how to reach me on the wiki forthcoming from Dawn. And safe to say that this is a hot topic that we hope to help make even hotter and to help generate some more awareness and uptake on, including getting you the practical tidbits and good stuff that are out there that might be able to support your efforts. So thank you to those, again, today who helped make this webinar happen. Sydney and your leadership, and certainly Dawn and yours as a real backbone of our webinar program. And thank you to those of you who joined on the call today. We are wrapping a few minutes early, which is perhaps never a bad thing. Welcome your additional comments and sharing by posting to the wiki. And we have other very useful webinars related to nutrition slated coming up in March, appropriately enough around Nutrition Month. One features the work of the Annapolis Health Promoting Schools project, which, as many of you know, are doing some exemplary work. And the other looks at Nutrition Tools for Schools, that program I mentioned from Ontario, in action, featuring Algoma School District in Northern Ontario. This is an area where, in fact, it's the school district that's really driving the adoption and implementation of this initiative, and in fact have included explicitly nutrition and multiple aspects within its district improvement plan, as well as the school's plans. So that's pretty exciting, and it's coming at it from a school district perspective as well. So those two webinars are coming up. I know Dawn will send you more information about that. Thank you again for joining us today, and as always, we welcome your comments and your feedback and suggestions of what else we could do to support your school health efforts.
And thank you, Cindy, for that. And because we have another minute or two, as you're signing off, would you take the time to just type us a little message? First of all, if the audio was fine or if it was too loud or too soft, because we're not hearing you talk back to us. We're always trying to check that out. And then also just let us know if this was your first time on the webinar and if the connection worked fine or if you had problems. Just a little comment like that just to help us with the software issues and anything else you might want to say. I keep a record of the chat box. We're able to save it, and so that then gives me a record of what I need to be working on to make sure that this software works well for you. And I can see lots of you are typing us a message that's very, very helpful. So we'll just wait to see those messages. Sydney and I will be here for another 5-10 minutes. So if you have any further questions, please type them in, and we will try and respond as best we can. So thank you. So I'll go off the audio now for a minute, Sydney, and if you have anything else you want to add, that would be great. And it looks like some people are saying this was their first time and things worked well, so that's great. Thank you.
Really, I don't have that much to add right now, but I would like to say that I'll make myself available to anyone who wants to email me for further follow-up. Sometimes you don't think of your questions until afterwards. It's definitely something I'm actively engaged in, and I think we're going to see lots of great new resources coming very soon from many quarters. So I just want to thank Dawn for all the help she gave me in getting connected and having things run smoothly. And thanks to Cindy, too, for initiating the topic. And I appreciated having this opportunity today. So thanks.
And as ever, I'm always keen to do work with parents, and so if any of you are working closely with PACs, Parent Advisory Councils, or want some suggestions, I know I'm going to be working with our local district PAC in December, and certainly this will be one of the topics I'll bring up. It's a very easy thing to get parents talking about food and getting other parents together. So thanks for all your comments that are coming in, and Sydney and I will stay here and stay on for a few minutes. Those those of you that are ready to sign up, what you do, you go up to the very top where it says File, and when you click on File at the bottom it says Exit. And we'll be sending you follow-up information in the next day or so. So thanks very much. And thank you, Sheila, for the clapping. Someone's worked out the icons there. That's great. A happy face from me. Thank you. Thank you, Sheila, too. Some of us, this is brand new, so we're just learning how to use the interactive features. Thanks so much. A nice comment from Delone there, Sydney, saying that you were wonderful. That was great.
Yeah, I was glad to see Delone's name on the list. And hi to Delone if you're still in there listening.
And Sheila's comment, Sydney, I don't know if you saw that, no place on the School Health Knowledge website. I guess we have it on the cache site where it says webinars, but somehow we have to continue to make it easy for folks to know where to look. I think once I've connected with them and start sending out updates on webinars, then they have that information. Someone has just added something. Okay, has been asked to do a presentation back east on his research on family meals. Did you see that from Delone, Sydney?
Yes, hi Delone. Actually, I just heard Paul speak fairly recently too. He's one of the ones who has the evidence showing that there's a lower rate of obesity and overweight among those who have more frequent family meals. And it's from his work with the grade 5 students. So I think he's still adding some papers to the work that came out of that Annapolis Valley. It would be well worth going to hear him if you have that chance. He presents very nicely.
And thank you, Cindy, for coming on when you did. I was able to get in through Patrick's computer, which is where you see Don Benson 1, and then I was able to get in once again through my computer, so the moderator. So the technology is somewhat working, but I'm going to shut down in about 5 minutes, and I'm just going to have my computer checked. And thank you, Sydney, for being on early, because my computer gave me problems when I knew you were on. You had moderator status, so you could have just run with the whole presentation. So I appreciate all the work you've done.
Well, thank you, Dawn. Really, it was a pleasure working with you. I was nervous at first. That's why I was on early, just to make sure everything works. But there was no cause for being nervous. It all worked very smoothly.
So we'll just wait for Sheila to click off in case she has any questions. And then once I see her go, I will exit. I'm going to take my computer down just to have my virus checker and my spyware checked. Okay, and it looks like Sheila has gone, so I'm going to click out. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Sydney. Great.
Bye, everyone. And it was a worthwhile experience for me. Bye-bye.